Hello, it's Jim Hutchins for the Jerusalem Connection Spot Report for this second day of October 2017. I want to deal with the issue today a little apart from what we would normally consider with regard to Israel, and that's the condition of our country. We are a divided country, and I don't mean just a division with so many on one side and another group on another side. We are fragmented. We are fragmented. And I want to read portions of an article by Victor David Hansen. Came out earlier this year in National Review, and he talks about this subject. He said, history has not been very kind to countries that enter a state of multicultural chaos. Multicultural chaos is basically that all cultures are equal. None better than any other. Christianity and religion is no better than Islam. Something like that. The United States is currently the world's oldest democracy, but America is no more immune from collapse than were some of history's most stable and impressive consensual governments. 5th century Athens, Republican Rome, Renaissance Florence and Venice, and many of the elected governments of our early 20th century Western European states eventually destroyed themselves, went bankrupt, or were overrun by invaders. The United States is divided as rarely before. Half the country, mostly liberal America, is concentrated in 146 of the nation's more than 3,000 counties. 146. Liberals occupy 146 of the nation's 3,000 counties, in an area that collectively represents less than 10% of the U.S. landmass. The other half, the conservative red states of the interior of America, is geographically, culturally, economically, politically, socially, and I would add religiously, and even more evangelically. They're at odds with the blue state America, which resides mostly on the two coasts, the east and west coast. The two Americans watch different news, they read different books, listen to different music, watch different television shows. Increasingly, they now live lives according to two widely different traditions. Currently, some 27% of Californians were not born in the United States. More than 40 million foreign-born immigrants currently live in the U.S., the highest number in the nation's history. Yet widely checked immigration comes at a time when the country has lost confidence in its prior successful adherence to a melting pot assimilation and integration. The ultimate result is a fragmented society into tribal cliques that vie for power, careers, and influence on the basis of ethnic solidarity rather than shared Americanness. History has not done very well. It's not been very kind to multicultural chaos. We fought a civil war that cost more than 600,000 lives, in part to uphold the idea that the individual states could not override the federal government. Yet sanctuary cities declare that they can freely nullify federal immigration law. California Senate passed a bill earlier this month that would prohibit the state from contracting with any firms that work on the federal government's wall at the border with Mexico. States such as California vowed that they will ignore Washington and work directly with foreign nations to promote their own policies on global warming. The national debt has doubled over the last 8 years, and nearly $20 trillion is unsustainable. Entitlement spending rose even as new taxes increased. The have-nots claim that the haves make far too much money, and the haves retort that they pay most of the income taxes while nearly half the country pays nothing. Nearly half the country pays absolutely no taxes. Illiberal attempts to end free speech, to sanction racial and gender segregation, to attack rather than argue with opponents, or are disguised by euphemisms. Euphemisms such as, quote, safe passages, or, quote, trigger warnings, and various isms and ologies. Behind the guise of campus activism and non-negotiable demands is the reality that too many students simply are unprepared to do their assigned work and seek exemption through protests in lieu of hard study. America barely survived the Civil War in 1861 to 65, or the Great Depression of 1929 through 39, and the rioting and the protests of the 1960s. But today's growing divides are additionally supercharged by instant internet and social media communications. All Americans need to take a deep breath, step back, and rein in the anger. They should assume their opponents are not all sinners and that supporters are not all saints. Things are bad. They're bad now, but our own history suggests that if we're not careful, they can get even worse. That's a pretty dire analysis of our country. And it's comparable to what Jesus said in Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, Jesus has been accused of casting out demons by Satan. And Jesus said this, how can Satan cast out Satan? He said, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. It cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. I would suggest to you that we're approaching that point in our civil discourse and our actions. Certainly as Christians, Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 3 says something that should serve as a guideline for us. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Yeah, we should do that. But that's not likely. And so what remains? Well, Peter tells us this, it is time for judgment to begin with the family of God, the household of God. If it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not keep the gospel of God, do not obey the gospel of God? And then he goes on to say, it is hard for the righteous to be saved. If it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? If it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? That's a good question. That's a good question. Because the existence of our country is in jeopardy. Till next week. Od ki yavo, the Messiah comes, Yivareka Yahweh. Yahweh bless you, bless those you love, bless those who love you.